Historically speaking, third world nations are nations that were unaligned with NATO or the USSR during the Cold War. Today, it is often used to describe countries facing economic underdevelopment, high poverty rates, and lower standards of living. Despite what Trad Crusader 1488 says on IG Reels, the reason these countries are still underdeveloped isn't because of inferior races and the white man's burden. The answer is much more convoluted and requires insight into geopolitical history and modern economic methods. One of these insights is the topic of neocolonialism.
I stood in front of the Shah of Iran, presidents of Indonesia, Ecuador, Panama, members of the Royal House of Saudi Arabia, and I've said something like, in this hand, I have millions of dollars for you and your friends if you play our game. In this hand, I have a gun in case you decide not to.
John Perkins, author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman, outlined the methods that were utilized in various regions around the world through assassinations and coups. Leaders who resist foreign interests and seek to improve their nations by resisting globalization face the threat of forced removal, which in turn disrupts governance and fosters instability. This interference not only hampers the establishment of stable institutions, but also perpetuates a siphoning of wealth and democracy from said countries. These consequences ripple through the global fabric, hindering progress, and leaves third world nations trapped in a cycle of underdevelopment. This leads to immigrants leaving their poor, destabilized countries to go where the wealth is, leaving the rest in horrible working and living conditions. An example of this would be the country of Haiti. As one of the poorest countries in the world, Haiti has had a rocky history fraught with colonialism, organic coups, and genocide of their own doing. However, their current state isn't simply because they kicked out all of the white people. Haiti won its independence in 1804, and its existence as a country of revolution and freed slaves immediately became a threat for pro-slavery American leaders, along with European colonists. President Thomas Jefferson even cut off aid to Haiti and instead pursued a policy to isolate Haiti due to fears that slaves would try to follow their example and revolt. As for the French, they were angry at having suffered a defeat like this. In 1825, the French King Charles X sent warships to Haiti with the message that the young nation would have to pay France 150 million francs to keep its independence. That amount was 10 times the amount the United States had paid France in the Louisiana Purchase. And due to the threats of war from France, Haiti obviously gave in. Over the next century, Haiti paid French slaveholders and their descendants the equivalent of between $20 and $30 billion. This forced them to take loans from the French and bury themselves into debt. In 1911, in American fashion, the government of the United States funded the acquisition of Haiti's treasury in order to receive interest payments related to the indemnity. It took until 1947, about 122 years, for Haiti to finally pay off all the associated interest to the City National Bank of New York. Haiti was also under U.S. martial law from 1915 to 1934, and a pro-United States president was installed after years of pressure from the United States to install a naval base in Haiti. How convenient. Also, as a side note, France did a similar petty thing to another one of their ex-colonies, Algeria. Between 1960 and 1966, France conducted 17 nuclear tests in the areas Algeria conceded to France in the Evian Accords. After the tests, nuclear fallout was detected as far away as Senegal, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, and Sudan. Nowadays, Haiti is in utter ruins and constant assassinations and organized crime are the norm. They join the masses of immigrants that come in through Florida along with Cubans, who have also been famously sabotaged by the US government. Now, of course, the United States, France, and other colonizers cannot solely be blamed for its current state, as is the case with many other countries. Corrupt leaders, bad economic planning, instability, and other factors along with power vacuums and conflicts should not be ignored. However, it does paint a picture and roadmap as to how their development was stunted by neocolonialism. When Mohammad Mossadegh became Prime Minister of Iran in 1951, he nationalized the country's oil industry. In March of 1953, the CIA began to draft a plan to overthrow him, called Operation Ajax, which later became the Trajax. On April 4, 1953, the CIA had an approved budget of $1 million to use on the operation. The CIA was instructed to use that money in any way to bring down Mossadegh. By December 1954, Mossadegh was successfully overthrown and imprisoned. The next year, new US-backed leader Fazlollah Zahedi soon reached an agreement with British and American oil companies. During his trial for charges of treason, Mossadegh stated, "My greatest sin is that I nationalized Iran's oil industry and discarded the system of political and economic exploitation by the world's greatest empire. This at the cost to myself, my family, and at the risk of losing my life, my honor, and my property. With God's blessing and the will of the people, I fought this savage and dreadful system of international espionage and colonialism." Mossadegh was not the first or last leader to be exiled, imprisoned, or murdered for opposing capitalist interests in global superpowers. Leaders like Thomas Sankara, Omar Torrijos, Patrice Lumumba, and Fidel Castro have all come under the crosshairs of Western governments in the name of preserving economic interests and power. And that brings us to the talking point of why do so many third world countries elect and support such bad leaders? While it is true that leaders of the third world can naturally be corrupt, selfish, and incompetent, the attack on democracy in these areas cannot be ignored. How are good leaders supposed to implement long-term benefits and lead by example for other leaders when they are constantly being couped and assassinated? Some also argue that some of these events happened so long ago, so by this point it's insignificant, which I disagree with. Objection! If you look at before and after images of these countries, it's obvious the amount of infrastructural and societal collapse that occurs after such events. Also, it's impossible for the average person to know when a coup is being backed or a political campaign is being sabotaged until after the fact. Even at the time of writing this, there are news stories about alleged election sabotage in Egypt and alleged assassination attempts on the anti-France leader of Burkina Faso. When all your good leaders get murdered or overthrown, what point is there to vote and want better for your country? The International Monetary Fund and World Bank are no strangers to third world countries, and although their aid can have benefits, it also comes with its cons. Aid from the World Bank and the IMF frequently have requirements such as enacting strict economic policies like deregulation, privatization, and austerity measures, which are strict economic measures meant to lower the government's deficit.
Through high-interest funds borrowed from the IMF, said nations couldn't pay back everything to the letter that the IMF desired, usually by design, and as a result would be forced to undergo so-called structural adjustment programs, where welfare cuts, liberalization of the market, and privatization took place, usually with ownership transferring back from said third world state to the former colonial power or whatever imperialist hegemon, be they local or global.
Thank you, Akeem, for reporting on the field and explaining it better than I could. By the way, that is a great video. Anyways, back to my video. Due to these conditions, the economies and populations of the recipient countries may suffer.
They'd build power plants and industrial parks, things that would benefit a few wealthy families in the country, the ones that own the industries. But the majority of the people would suffer. They would be left holding a huge debt they couldn't repay. So we'd go back and say, since you can't pay your debt, sell your resource, oil or whatever, real cheap to our corporations. Privatize. Sell your utilities, your schools, your jails, everything like that to our corporations.
If you're not convinced by all the previous examples, an example of a first world country that got screwed over by the IMF is Greece. During the Great Recession, Greece was going through an economic crisis much like the rest of the world. The Troika, consisting of the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, played a central role in formulating and implementing bailout programs and austerity measures. The Troika's involvement in Greece's economic affairs was highly controversial as it imposed stringent conditions on the country in exchange for financial assistance. These conditions included deep spending cuts, tax increases, and structural reforms aimed at stabilizing Greece's economy and reducing its debt burden. Despite these lofty goals, the Troika's policies contributed to a significant contraction in Greece's GDP and exacerbated social hardship, sparking widespread protests and political turmoil. This drastic decline had a profound impact. The debt-to-GDP ratio surged from its 2009 level of 127% to approximately 170%. Then 3 years later, the IMF admitted that they failed to realize the damage that the restructural program would cause. Another country with a bad history with the IMF is Argentina. The 2001 Argentina financial crisis stands as one of the most severe economic downturns in the nation's history. It was characterized by profound economic contractions, surging unemployment, widespread poverty, and social upheaval. While the crisis stemmed from deep-rooted causes, IMF policies and interventions exacerbated its severity. The IMF's emphasis on austerity measures, fiscal tightening, and the prioritization of debt repayment over social welfare and economic stability further strained Argentina's fiscal position and eroded public confidence in the government's crisis management abilities. And although the IMF supported fixing the value of the peso to the dollar 1-to-1, in December 2001, when it became clear that the agreed program was no longer sustainable, the IMF refused to give Argentina a 1.2.4 billion share of its total $21.6 billion loan. And if you're interested in all this econ stuff, I haven't read it, but I heard there's a very good book called The Shock Doctrine that goes into all these things. With all of that being said, I can recognize that mistakes happen. Nothing can ever go absolutely perfect. However, the question that should be raised is if the conditions attached to these loans truly help countries out, or if they're designed to be debt traps. As time goes on, we are starting to see non-Western powers such as Russia and China offer big loans with no overt restrictions or rules. Personally, while I don't believe aid is inherently bad, the combination of large sums of money, corrupt leaders, strict economic plans, dependence on Western contractors, and the prioritization of privatizing their economies have led to disastrous results that rarely benefit the average person and working class. In conclusion, the legacy of neocolonialism continues to cast a long shadow over the development trajectories of many countries. Through webs of economic exploitation, political manipulation, and cultural domination, neocolonial forces perpetuate systemic inequalities and hinder prosperity for millions around the world. The effects of neocolonialism are pervasive and can be characterized through the resource draining of the Third World, along with constantly waging war and funding conflicts for a desirable outcome. And as leftists, it's imperative for us to confront the structures of power and capitalism that sustain neocolonial dynamics. Only through collective action and a commitment to educating the masses can we begin to dismantle the systems of neocolonialism. As always, thank you for watching, subscribe, like the video, and comment your thoughts. If I got any pronunciations wrong, anything that you would want me to make a video on, or anything that I left out. Obviously, with a topic this broad and historical, there's going to be a lot of things that I left out, or a lot of other good cases. So just let me know in the comments, and until next time, see ya.